My wife said, I want our child to look like your friend, so I'm going to sleep with him. I hope you understand. I gave her a destructive surprise. Before we go on, hit subscribe and drop a comment telling us which city you're tuning in from. Agatha always wanted children. She always said it was her dream. She didn't mention it as a distant idea or something that would happen someday, but as a concrete, almost urgent goal. From the moment I met her, that topic appeared in our conversations with a frequency that at first seemed tender to me. I interpreted it as a sign that she was a family-oriented person, someone who knew what she wanted in life. We met when we were both 28 years old. The relationship moved fast, faster than I was used to. At 6 months, we were already talking about moving in together. At a year, we were looking at options, and before our 2-year anniversary, Agatha started insisting on a wedding. It wasn't aggressive or obvious pressure. It was more constant, like a drop of water falling over and over until it leaves a mark. There's no point in waiting so long, she'd say. We already know each other, we know what we want. I wasn't completely convinced, but I didn't have clear reasons to refuse either. There were no major problems between us. We argued, yes, like any couple, but nothing that seemed out of the ordinary. Besides, there was something in her way of speaking that made everything sound logical, even inevitable, as if getting married wasn't a decision, but the natural next step. So I accepted. We got married when we were both 30. It was a simple ceremony with close relatives and some friends. Among them was John, one of my oldest friends. I'd known him since college. He was one of those people who fit easily into any environment, self-confident, sociable, with a presence that drew attention effortlessly. He had blonde hair and blue eyes, features that had always been a subject of comments, especially because they weren't common in our environment. I remember Agatha noticed him the first time I introduced them, long before the wedding, not in an obvious way, but enough for me to notice. At that moment, I didn't give it any importance. It was normal to notice someone like that. After we got married, the topic of children became more frequent. It was no longer an idea, but a plan. I want to start soon, she'd tell me. I don't want to wait years. I, on the other hand, had doubts, not because I didn't want children, but because I felt it wasn't the right time yet. I wanted financial stability, more time to adapt as a married couple, to better understand our dynamic. But every time I tried to explain that, Agatha interpreted it as a definitive refusal. There's always something, she'd answer. There will always be a reason to wait. There were weeks when she seemed convinced, when she'd say maybe I was right, that we could give ourselves a little more time, but that state never lasted long. She'd return to the topic with the same intensity. The strange thing was that as time went by, her stance started to change inconsistently. One day she'd talk about having children as an absolute priority, and the next she'd say she wasn't sure, that maybe it wasn't the best thing at that moment. I've been thinking, she told me one night. Maybe we should rethink it. That word rethink had stuck with me. It wasn't the first time she'd used it, but this time it sounded different, colder, more calculated. Rethink what exactly? I asked everything. She answered, if we want the same thing, if we're ready, those things. I didn't insist at that moment. I thought it was a passing doubt, something normal. But from then on, comments started to appear that didn't quite fit. One day, while we were watching a series, a character appeared with very marked European features, fair skin, blue eyes, blonde hair. Agatha pointed him out almost immediately. I'd like our son to look like that, she said. She said it casually, as if she were talking about the weather. That's not up to us, I replied. It's genetics. She smiled, but it wasn't a natural smile. Well, sometimes unexpected things happen. I didn't give it much importance at that moment. I thought it was a superficial comment, something without much background, but it wasn't the only one. Over time, she started repeating similar ideas. She'd talk about specific physical characteristics, fair skin, blue eyes, certain facial features. She always mentioned it as a preference, never as a demand, but the insistence was constant. It would be good for him, she'd say. He'd have more opportunities. That phrase was the one that really made me stop. More opportunities because of how he looks. I asked. Don't pretend that doesn't matter, she answered. You know perfectly well how the world works. I didn't know what to say at that moment. Not because I agreed, but because I was surprised by the coldness with which she said it. It wasn't an improvised opinion. It was something she'd clearly thought about before. From then on, I started noticing more things, small details I'd overlooked before, the way she observed certain people, the comments she made in specific situations, the implicit comparisons, and little by little John's name started appearing more frequently in our conversations. "Have you talked to John lately?" she'd ask out of nowhere. "Yes, a few days ago," I'd answer. "Why?" "Just curious." It didn't seem like a big deal, but it happened enough to catch my attention. Sometimes she'd mention things about him without any context, comments about his work, his appearance, his personality. "He's always been very self-confident," she'd say. "Yes, I guess. And he has good genetics." That last phrase left me silent. I didn't know how to answer without it sounding like an accusation. At that point, I still didn't have a clear idea of what was happening. I just had an uncomfortable feeling, as if something was out of place, but I couldn't pinpoint it. I tried to rationalize it. I thought maybe I was overinterpreting her words, looking for patterns where there weren't any. After all, she was my wife. I trusted her, but that trust started to weaken the day everything became explicit. It was an ordinary afternoon. I was in the living room reviewing some work documents when I heard her moving around in the bedroom. I didn't pay attention at first, but after a few minutes I noticed something strange. The sound of drawers opening and closing, footsteps faster than normal, as if she were in a hurry. I went to the bedroom and found her in front of the mirror, getting ready. She was more dressed up than usual for a day, with no apparent plans. "Are you going out?" I asked. She didn't answer immediately. She kept looking at her reflection for a few seconds, as if she were rehearsing something in her mind. Then she looked down and, without turning completely toward me, said, "Yes." "Where to?" Then something happened that I didn't expect. Her expression changed abruptly. Her eyes got watery, or at least it seemed so, but there were no real tears. It was a fake cry, a performance. "I need to tell you something," she said. Her voice trembled, but there was something artificial in the tone. I felt a pressure in my chest. I didn't know why, but at that moment I knew what she was going to say wouldn't be something simple. "What's wrong?" I asked. She turned slowly toward me, maintaining that expression of apparent anguish. "I made a difficult decision," she continued, "and I can't keep hiding it." I didn't say anything, I just waited. I've been thinking a lot about having a child, about what would be best for us, for the family. Her way of speaking was strangely structured, as if she were reading a script. "Agatha, get to the point," I told her. Then she took a deep breath and said it. "I want our child to look like your friend John, so I'm going to sleep with him. I hope you understand." The silence that followed was absolute. There was no immediate confusion or instant anger, just a kind of emptiness, as if my mind needed time to process what I'd just heard. "What?" It was the only thing I could say. She took a step toward me, maintaining that expression that tried to look vulnerable. "I know it's hard," she said. "It is for me too, but I'm doing it for the good of our family." The way she used that phrase seemed absurd to me. "For the good of the family," I repeated. "Yes, I want our child to have the best possible opportunities. And you know that John has characteristics that we can't give him." The clarity with which she explained it eliminated any doubt. It wasn't an impulsive idea or a bad joke. It was something she'd thought about, analyzed, and decided on. And him I asked, although I already suspected the answer. "Does he agree?" She answered, "We talked a few days ago." That was the part that finally broke any attempt to rationalize the situation. It wasn't just a unilateral decision. It was something she'd planned with someone else, someone I consider a friend. I looked at her, tried to find some sign of doubt, of regret, of humanity in what she'd just said, but there was none. There was only conviction. "It's going to be hard for me," she added, "but I'm willing to do it." That phrase was what finally triggered something in me. Not because of what it meant, but because of what it revealed in her mind. She was the one making a sacrifice. And at that moment, I understood we weren't having the same conversation. I took a deep breath, looked down for a few seconds, and then nodded slowly. "Okay," I said. Agatha blinked as if she didn't expect such a quick answer. Then her expression changed. The tension in her face disappeared and was replaced by something that looked like relief, even satisfaction. "Really?" she asked. "Yes," I replied, keeping my tone as neutral as possible. If that's what you think is best. I didn't finish the sentence. There was no need. She took a step toward me and hugged me tightly. I knew you'd understand, she said. That's why I love you. I didn't return the hug. I stood still with my arms at my sides, feeling a mix of disbelief and something colder, more calculated. This is what's best for us, she continued. For our future. I nodded slightly, although I wasn't really listening anymore. My mind was elsewhere, processing what had just happened and, above all, what I was going to do next. She pulled away from me and looked at me with a smile that tried to be comforting. Tomorrow, she said, when I get back, I'll make it up to you. I frowned slightly. Make it up to me? Yes, she answered, getting a little closer. I'm going to give you the best sex of your life so you feel better about all this. The way she said it was clear enough without needing details. There was no affection in that offer, just a kind of emotional transaction. Where is that going to happen with John? I asked. In a motel, she answered without hesitation. It can't be at John's house. Why? Because he's married, she said as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. That detail finally closed the whole picture. Not only was she willing to do what she'd proposed, but she was also completely aware of his situation and didn't care. I nodded once more. I understand. She smiled satisfied. Thanks for understanding, she said. I didn't answer. A few minutes later, she finished getting ready, took her things, and left the house as if nothing was out of the ordinary, as if she hadn't just completely destroyed any concept of marriage I had. I waited for the door to close, and as soon as I heard the sound of the lock, I took out my phone. I didn't hesitate for a second about who to call. Roberto answered on the third ring. What happened? I need you to come over, I told him. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. Everything okay? No, I replied, not at all. That was enough. I'm on my way, he said. Don't move, he hung up. About 20 minutes later, I heard his truck pull up outside. Roberto was always direct, even in the way he arrived at places. He got out, slammed the door, and knocked once before entering. What happened? He asked as soon as he crossed the door. I didn't waste time. I told him everything from the conversation to the way Agatha had proposed it, including the fact that John was already involved. As I spoke, Roberto's expression changed. First disbelief, then annoyance, and finally something much more direct. God, he said, passing a hand over his face. With all due respect, what bed did you get that bitch from? I didn't answer. He paused. This sounds surreal, like someone made it up. He shook his head. That chick has watched too much soap operas. He stayed silent for a second, clenching his jaw. That bastard, he continued. How dare he? He's our friend. He was, I corrected him. Roberto looked at me. Yes, he was. I leaned on the table, feeling the exhaustion fall all at once. I'm going to leave her, I said. There was no doubt in my voice. Roberto let out a brief laugh, without humor. Of course you're going to leave her, he replied. That goes without saying. The thing is how I didn't answer immediately. I was thinking of packing my things and leaving, I said. Finally, I didn't finish the sentence because Roberto interrupted me immediately. What did you say? I looked at him. I'm going to leave. No, he answered. That's not going to happen. His tone changed. It wasn't just annoyance anymore. It was determination. You pay for this house, he continued. You're telling me she's going to leave with your friend? Do whatever she wants, and on top of that, she's going to keep the house you pay for. I didn't answer. No, he repeated. That's not going to happen. No way. He stayed silent for a few seconds thinking. Then he looked up. You know what? He said we're going to do something better. I didn't ask. I just looked at him. I'm going for the truck. He added. What for? Trust me. He left the house without waiting for an answer. A couple of minutes later, I heard his pickup truck engine start. He brought it as close as possible to the entrance. He came back in and clapped once as if he were starting a task. Let's get to work. What are you doing? I asked. Fixing this. He answered. Without waiting any longer, he walked straight to the bedroom and opened the closet. Everything that belongs to her, he said, goes outside. I stood still for a few seconds, processing the idea. Really? Really, he answered. If she already made her decision, we make ours. There was no doubt in his voice. And at that moment I understood he was right, so I helped him. We started taking everything out, clothes, shoes, accessories, boxes with personal things. Roberto didn't have any kind of delicacy. He stuffed everything into black bags, tying them tightly. Let her new family plan include taking care of this, he muttered. In less than an hour, practically everything that belonged to Agatha was out of the house. We loaded the bags onto the truck one by one. When we finished, Roberto leaned on the tailgate of the pickup. One part is missing, he said. Which one? He looked directly at me, the other idiot. There was no need to explain more. We got into the truck and drove to John's house. The ride was in silence. When we arrived, the house was lit up. There was a car in the driveway. He's here, Roberto said. We got out. Roberto walked straight to the door and knocked loudly. A few seconds later, someone opened. It wasn't John, it was his wife. She looked at us confused. Yes. Roberto didn't hesitate. We need to talk to you, he said. She frowned, but opened the door a little more. About what? Roberto looked at me for a second as if giving me the chance to speak, but I didn't. So he did it without beating around the bush. He told her everything, every detail. Her expression changed slowly from confusion to disbelief and then to something harder to describe. No, she murmured. That makes no sense. I wish it didn't, Roberto replied. The silence that followed was heavy. She looked down, clearly affected. Are you sure? She asked finally. I nodded completely. There are no more questions. Just a decision. Then, she said, taking a deep breath, I'm going to do something too. She looked at both of us. Come in. We went in. And in a matter of minutes, we were doing exactly the same thing as in my house, taking out everything that belonged to John, clothes, personal items. Everything. Roberto worked with the same energy as before. Let them take care of each other, he said while carrying another bag. John's wife wasn't crying openly, but her silence said more than anything else. And so, in less than an hour, the truck was full again, but this time not only with Agatha's things, but also with John's. Roberto slammed the truck door shut and stood for a few seconds looking at everything we'd loaded. Then he smiled, but it wasn't a normal smile. It was that kind of smile that appears when someone has already made a decision and doesn't plan to back down. I know what it'd take all this, he said. I looked at him where. He turned to me with a calmness that contrasted with everything that had just happened. To the junkyard. I didn't answer immediately. I just nodded slowly. At that point, I was no longer thinking about recovering anything or arguing anymore. Everything had crossed a line of no return. I took out my phone. First, I called Agatha. It rang once, twice, 3 times. She didn't answer. I hung up. Then I dialed John. Same story. He didn't answer. I let out a brief laugh, without humor. How convenient, I murmured. John's wife, who was standing next to the truck, dialed John. This time he did answer. She put on speaker. Hi. Honey. John's voice was heard. I'm a bit busy. Remember, I'll be leaving work tomorrow. I took the night shift for our vacation. Honey. There was a second of silence, and then she spoke. Go to hell. The change in tone was immediate. There was no doubt. There was no trembling. It was direct. Dry. I know perfectly well you're fucking Agatha, she continued. We're going to throw all your things, clothes, computer, and everything in the junkyard. On the other side of the line, there was silence, a heavy silence. And before John could answer, Roberto leaned into the phone and spoke with a twisted smile. Actually, he said, we're going to throw it into the trash compactor. The reaction didn't take long. Who are you with? John asked, agitated. Are you cheating on me with someone else? The wife let out a short, incredulous laugh. You're shameless. She replied, you have 30 minutes for you and Agatha to get to the junkyard, or all this is going to turn into shit, including your work laptop. That word changed everything. No, John said quickly. Honey, reconsider. I don't know what you're talking about. That laptop is basically what feeds me. I have important things on there. Perfect, she replied. Then run. She paused. Let the game begin. And she hung up. The silence left behind was different, more tense, but also clearer. Roberto let out a loud laugh. I like you, he told her. You have a pretty badass mind. That last phrase, very much his style. She didn't answer. She just crossed her arms looking at the truck. Let's go, she said. Finally, the 3 of us got in. The ride to the junkyard was short, about 15 minutes. Nobody talked too much. There was no need. Everything was already decided. When we arrived, the place was practically empty. You could only hear the distant noise of machinery and the wind moving light debris. Roberto parked the truck near an area where there was an industrial compactor. It was one of those big, metal machines that leave nothing intact. "Here," he said. We got out. The air had that characteristic smell of waste, of dampness, of abandonment. But at that moment, that was the least important thing. Roberto opened the back of the truck. "We have to unload the important stuff first," he said. And we did that between the three of us. We started separating the most valuable things, laptops, documents, personal items that clearly had economic or sentimental weight. Not to save them, but to make sure they were the first to disappear. Roberto took one of the laptops. "Whose is this?" "Agatha's." I answered. "Perfect." He placed it near the edge of the compactor. He put John's next to it. "These go first," he added. A few more minutes passed, and then we saw lights in the distance. A car approaching at full speed. "They're here," Roberto said. The car stopped abruptly. The doors opened. Agatha and John got out almost at the same time. Both looked upset, not just because of the situation, but because they clearly didn't expect to find us there together. Agatha looked at me first. "What's going on?" she asked with a mix of anger and nervousness. I didn't answer. John, on the other hand, went straight to his wife. "What is all this?" he said. "What's wrong with you?" She didn't move. 30 minutes, she replied. "You arrived on time." John looked around, noticing the truck, the bags, the things arranged near the compactor. His expression changed. "You're not going to do this," he said to Roberto. He took a step forward. "Watch," Roberto replied. "Agatha, approach me." "Apollo," she said, lowering her voice. "This isn't necessary. We could talk about it." I looked at her. "You've talked enough." I answered. I didn't raise my voice. There was no need. John, for his part, tried to change the focus. He approached his wife. "Look," he said, "whatever you think is going on, we can fix it." And then he did something that in another context might have worked. He hugged her. She hesitated for a second and then hugged him back. There was a silence, a suspended moment. John closed his eyes, as if that were enough to erase what he'd done. "I swear you won't regret giving me this chance," he said. They pulled apart, and in that instant, she looked him straight in the eyes. Without emotion, without doubt, destroy them. It was a clear, direct, definitive order. Roberto smiled, gladly, without wasting time. He pushed the first laptop into the compactor. The sound was immediate, a dry, metallic crunch, then another and another one. The pieces disappeared in seconds. John took a step forward. "No," he yelled, but it was too late. Roberto took the next one. "This one too," he said. He threw it. More noise. More destruction. Agatha tried to get closer. "Wait," she said, but I stepped in. "No." She looked at me incredulous. "Apollo, it's over." There was no more discussion. One by one, things started to disappear. Clothes, devices, personal items, everything. The compactor didn't distinguish value, history, or intention. It only destroyed. John yelled, Agatha begged, but nobody stopped. Roberto even laughed at some moments, not out of gratuitous cruelty, but because of the irony of the whole situation. "What a great family plan," he murmured. In less than 20 minutes, practically everything had disappeared. Nothing relevant was left, only silence and unrecognizable remains. Agatha fell to her knees. John stood still, motionless, looking at the machine. His wife simply watched, without tears, without regret, just determination. I took a deep breath, and at that moment I understood completely. There was no turning back. There was no possible reconstruction. "I'm going to start the divorce," I said. I didn't look at Agatha. It wasn't necessary. "Me too," said John's wife. And so in that place, surrounded by trash and remains of what were once our lives, everything ended. Without final screams, without reconciliations, just decisions and consequences.